My name is Tom Harris, and this is Exploratory Journeys. My guest today is Dr. Jay Lehr, who's the Senior Policy Analyst with the International Climate Science Coalition. Besides being a graduate from Princeton University at a very young age, Dr. Lehr is also the former Science Director of the Heartland Institute. Hey, Dr. Lehr, great to have you back again.
Tom, it's always a pleasure. Look forward to chatting with you on all kinds of interesting topics today.
Yeah. Just as a little side note, I understand with Princeton, you actually had a nodding acquaintance with Albert Einstein.
I did. It was exactly a nodding acquaintance. He walked behind my dorm going to his office as I walked behind my dorm going to class. And we saw each other a lot, and we nodded. Now, I was 17 years old, and I wouldn't have known what to say to Dr. Einstein, but I still feel, that I knew him and he knew me. My son has driven me crazy saying, oh, my God, why didn't you strike up a conversation? And I keep telling him at the age of 17 at Princeton, what would I say to Albert Einstein? But it was fun to know him in that way.
Oh, wow. That's pretty amazing. One of the most famous people in history. It's certainly the most in the history of science. You know, Jay, one thing we wanted to talk about today was this climate emergency that they're pressuring Joe Biden to declare. In Canada, our national government declared a climate emergency in June 2019, and 384 local jurisdictions in Canada have also done the same. And in fact, across the world, 1,800 local governments in 33 countries have declared a climate emergency. But none have in Africa, and practically none in Asia, none in the Middle East, and only 2 in South America. Like, what gives? Do these people know something we don't know?
Well, that is interesting. I think they do know something that the others that don't know or won't accept. They more recognize that it's a fraud, and it's so low. You dealt with poorer economic countries in Africa and Asia and South America. They have other fish to fry, so to speak. I mean, if you were to list the problems that their governments have to tackle, their health care and their sanitation and their food supply and their clean water and things of that nature. And so they're so focused on these things that they don't have as much as the countries that are declaring emergencies, that they just don't focus at it. But the real reason that all these governments that have declared climate emergencies is a climate emergency for a government is a code word for increasing the power of government over their citizens. I mean, they're very clever that way. They actually know nothing about the science at all. They don't know whether it's a problem or not. But they're smart enough as government officials to realize, wow, if we declare a climate emergency, it gives us powers over everything that goes on. We are in total control over all the energy used by our citizens. If we take it the furthest, we can be in control of how many children you have, because each person emits carbon dioxide. It gives us control over all the appliances you use, all the miles you drive. I mean, it's just the best way to have control. And they're smart enough to realize this, and it doesn't matter whether they believe it or not. They've jumped on the horse and they're riding it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be writing a lot about this in hopes that it might be a way to open the eyes of some of the people that, don't know really what's going on, but unfortunately they believe what they read every day in the mainstream media.
Well, one thing I always say to people is, hey, a 1 degree Celsius rise since 1880 is not an emergency. A 7-inch per century sea level rise, not accelerating, is not an emergency. Triple the number of polar bears now than there were in 1960s is not an emergency. Like, there's no emergency. What the heck are they talking about?
Well, there is, of course, no emergency, and I'm sure you and I could come up with a list of 20 lies that are part of the climate fraud. I might say that Patrick Moore just came out with a new book focusing on 11 of the major lies. Did a beautiful job with it. But these government people and the people you're speaking of, they don't care. I mean, it doesn't matter what science you throw at them. They just ignore it. There was an article in Epic Times this week about a mother talking to her child who totally buys into the climate emergency, and the mother tries to get the child to do a little research on their own and to do some critical thinking. And it really is an upward battle. Number one, young people don't have a problem with government control. They don't have a problem with socialism, but they're not trained in science, so it's just easy for them to dismiss it all.
Yeah.
We've really got to find some new ways of making our case. It can't be just the real science.
Yeah, and one way I think might be valuable is to point out to people that of the $1 billion a day that is spent on climate finance, we're spending only a 20th of it, 5%, on trying to help people adapt to natural climate change. So we let them suffer because we're trying to protect people who've yet to be born from something that almost certainly won't even happen. So, that when I was in Copenhagen, for example, Jay, the Africans were quite upset. They were saying, you people are all debating what's going to happen in the year 2100. What about us now? And of course, the fact is natural climate change causes problems, and geez, we should help them adapt. The idea we can control it is pretty far-fetched.
Well, you're pointing exactly to the reason why in Africa and Asia and South America, they are not focusing on climate emergency. They're focusing on the things that you just mentioned that are more meaningful to them, and that really is terrific that's happening. But it's an upward climb. I'm relatively optimistic, though, that it's going to have an endpoint. And the reason is, at least in the United States, or for some years already in Canada, with this very liberal government, basically a socialist government, which you largely have, and we're getting to, our citizenry is going to be damaged and harmed in the next year and a half by all of the things. I mean, the U.S. now has a new climate czar. They have a new person at EPA in charge of all the climate activity. In every area of the U.S. cabinet now, they have people who are going to take it to the American public and create pain in a year and a half. So, and I really believe that they're going to be thrown out as a result, as our gasoline doubles, as our electricity rates double and triple, as we lose our personal freedoms, freedom of speech. We're monitored on all social media and have to fall in line with what the oligarchs of the social media require. I think in a year and a half, and certainly in the two until our next election cycle, people are going to start waking up saying, this isn't such a good idea.
So you're optimistic, actually, not the sort of doom and gloom like we hear from most people on the right now.
That's right. I'm totally optimistic, and I go back to the old saying, and as I recall, I think you hunted down where it came from. Give a man enough rope, he'll hang himself, and that's basically. I am delighted. I don't know if it's worked out that well in Canada, but I'm delighted in the United States that the liberals, the progressives, have taken over. I really wasn't looking forward to 4 more years of Trump being harangued daily. Give them a chance to govern, and they will screw up. They're screwing up every single day. They are, on a daily basis, creating platforms for conservatives to run against the Democrats in the next election cycle. There are, I think, 411 seats or so held by the Democrats, and in the coming months there will be new people that are going to say, I want that House of Representatives seat, or I want that Senate seat, and here's my platform. and their platform is going to be a list of all the terrible things that are being done to the citizens.
Yeah. Actually, that brings up an interesting topic. If you look back at the Trump administration, how do you feel about that particular 4 years? Do you feel happy with it? What do you think?
Well, Trump is a strange duck, and you can say all kind of things about his quirky personality. But Tom, quite frankly, I'm 84 years old, and he has certainly been the best president in my lifetime. Better than Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest presidents in history. I'd probably have to go back to George Washington to find his equal. And we're seeing it. I live in a forested farming area in central Ohio, and we've been here going on 25 years. And for the first 22 or 23 years we lived here, there was not a new home built within a mile. As I speak right now, there are at least 30 homes going up within that mile. And this is a result of Trump's economic policies. There isn't any question about it, how the country has benefited. Now, Biden is trying to undo all of those things, but quite honestly, I think in the 2 years that he'll have a free reign with the House and the Senate, he isn't going to be able to destroy much of what Trump has done. And the next person who runs for president in 4 years, I think, will be able to put back most of the things that Trump did that were beneficial to the nation.
Yeah, one thing that disappointed me, though, about the Trump administration is that they didn't revisit the endangerment finding, where carbon dioxide is still considered a pollutant to be controlled under the Clean Air Act. Why do you think that was? I guess he just maybe had too much on his plate.
Well, you've said it exactly, Tom. I would agree with you. It was a major disappointment. But in general, I was an advisor to Mr. Trump for the first couple of years. Actually, I was advisor to him during his debates and as soon as he was elected, and the White House. And he has credited me as been a major reason that they pulled out of the Paris Accord.
Yeah, congratulations.
And all of that was great. But
super.
You're right. The endangerment finding is arguably the most worst decision by our Supreme Court. And I think with you, if I had one thing that I would have, redone, I would have gone after it. But at the same time, I understand why, aside from pulling out of the Paris Accord, Trump did not want to make climate change a higher priority. He felt he had bigger, economic things to do. He had a long list of priorities, and because climate change came out relatively low, I think that's why he didn't push his EPA directors to go after the endangerment finding.
Yeah.
It was a mistake. Maybe 4 years from now with a new president, someone might go after it. But it's been a very sad thing.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Gina McCarthy earlier. She's in charge of Biden's massive climate change agenda. She's the czar of climate change. So what do you think of her and her previous time as head of the EPA?
Well, I think she's the worst EPA administrator we've ever had. She's a politician. She knows nothing about science, and what she does know, she goes in the opposite direction of what's true. I find her the worst person they could have named, but I think that's true in a number of their cabinet administrators, and I'm sort of glad of that. I want the worst people in his cabinet, so they'll do the worst things and make my case for optimism that within 2 years the public is not going to like it, and it's going to be very easy to run against their edicts, which are causing pain to the citizens. But Gina McCarthy could not have been a worse choice. But again, it doesn't bother me. She'll try to undo every good environmental regulation that Trump had put in place, and mostly what he did was undo regulations. When he came into office, he said for every new regulation, we're going to eliminate two regulations. Well, it came out not 2-1, but 20-1.
Oh, wow.
Throughout his 4 years, every new regulation was met with 20 undoing of regulations.
Huh.
She'll try to put as many back in place as possible.
So that's one of the great postmortems of Trump's time in office is his destruction, his getting rid of all these useless regulations and actually doing things like pulling out of the Paris Agreement, et cetera. Now, staying on the American